Welcome to 101 webinar series ERS and NASS. My name is Gal Hochman and I'm a professor at Rutgers University. I'm also the board chair of the Council on Food, Agriculture and Research Economics, a member organization in the National Coalition for Food and Agriculture Research, NCFAR, the organization that is organizing this 101 series. Next. NCFAR is a coalition of food and agriculture research stakeholders that provides science-based solutions to pressing policy questions and challenges. Next. This last webinar in the series that focuses on USDA is USDA's Economic Research Service, ERS, and the National Agricultural Statistical Service. Next slide. Our panelist includes Dr. Spiro Sterfanou, the administrator of the Economic Research Service. Dr. Sterfanou provides leadership and guidance for the agency's research, analytical, and technical operation. Next slide. The next panelist will be Herbert, the administrator of USDA's National Agricultural Statistical Service since 2016. He brings extensive experience in all aspects to the agency's work. Next slide, please. And finally, the third panelist will be Dr. Barbara P. Glenn. She is the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture CEO since 2014. She is a scientist with decades of experience as a researcher, policy leader, and advocate for agriculture.
Our first speaker is Dr. Spiro Sterfanou. He is an administrator at the USDA's Economic Research Service.
You can have the first slide, please. And then the next slide. Thanks. Okay, so the Economic Research Service is celebrating its 60th anniversary this month. And we have the mission of providing trusted, objective, and timely research and statistics on agriculture, food, the environment, and rural America. We accomplish this by producing timely economic statistics, build and strengthen research data on agriculture and rural America, and we provide the public with trusted sources of information per means of data dissemination. Now, since the beginning, our agency's core mission has remained unchanged, yet the topics we cover continue to evolve based on changes within the food and ag sector. And ERS shapes its research program and products to serve those. Sorry, we got a little background noise. We shape our research program and products to serve those who routinely make or influence public policy and program decisions. So our key clientele include the White House and USDA policy officials, US Congress, program administrators and managers of other federal agencies, state and local governments, and organizations, including farm and industry groups. Next slide, please. So here you see the broad range of topics we cover. We're constantly looking ahead to anticipate trends and conduct research on emerging issues affecting farmers in rural America. And as you can see, we focus on the agricultural economy and just not farm production operations, but also households' well-being as well. We look at the rural economy and the investments in communities and drivers of rural economic performance. And we look to the global markets and trade. And we're looking at the major markets, the competitors, the economic impacts of exports and imports, trade barriers, different trade agreements. Next slide, please. To continue, we also look at food economic topics related to food safety. Look at the benefits associated with reducing food safety risks and the economic impacts of the food hazards. We look at food and nutrition topics with US food security being a key issue, food nutrition assistance programs, food choices and health outcomes, and looking at that nexus of where health and food come together, and also resources in the environment and the economic impacts of conservation programs and the types of policies designed to protect the environment. Next slide, please. Now, the Economic Research Service, as part of USDA, is one of 13 principal federal statistical agencies. Along with NASS, USDA has 2 of these 13 principal federal statistical agency. And it's important to note that as one of these 13 federal statistical agencies, ERS does not make policy recommendations. Our role is to provide objective, reliable research for both public and private decision makers, covering issues that parallel and complement the mission of USDA. So we need to do this to ensure the trust among our nation's farmers and the general public. ERS will adhere to the federal statistical directives for the Office of the Management and Budget, while also coordinating activities with the Office of Statistical and Science Policy. Our responsibility is to ensure the quality, objectivity, and transparency of the statistical information we provide. Next slide, please. We produce a lot of data. ERS is a data-driven operation. And as you know, agricultural statistics are at the center of many aspects of our lives, whether it's feeding the world, ensuring a safe food supply, providing water for societal needs, promoting health and nutrition, caring for the environment, responding to climate change, and even maintaining an adequate supply of energy. Statistics provide that solid base for decision-making and all of these issues. Some of the examples here on this slide, the Agriculture Resource Management Survey is one of the key sources of information on financial condition, production practices, and resource use of America's farm businesses and the economic well-being of farm households in the United States. And we do this in close partnership with NASS. We also provide support here on the National Household Food Acquisition and Purchase Survey, Food Apps. It's one of our innovations. It's a nationally representative survey of American households to collect unique and comprehensive data about household food purchases and acquisitions. And we have information on store sales and household scanner data. We invest a lot in our data. And these data from these surveys are taken into account by public decision makers who craft policies that affect the farm sector. And while statistics are important to the research analysis mission of USDA, the impact of that information we gather extends far beyond the agriculture department and farm sector. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis uses our information to calculate the agriculture portion of the U.S. domestic product, gross domestic product. The EPA uses the agriculture chemical usage data obtained from ARMS, shape some of its programs. Next slide, please. Here's a long list of research that ERS addresses and several key issues that affect farmers. And through our research, and that's made possible by social scientists, not just economists, sociologists, geographers, statisticians, data scientists, along with our professional support staff, we provide critical data on several key issues that the farmers of our country face today. Now, to accomplish the ERS research and analysis, we digitally produce a number of products. We have economic research reports, we have articles in Amber Waves magazine, as well as data visualization and data products throughout the year. Let's try next slide, please. So some of our recent efforts here are listed below on this slide. One of the activities we engaged in last summer, we created the COVID-19 Rapid Response Team as a means of providing timely economic analysis to help policymakers understand the current impact and status of the pandemic. We have a COVID working paper series that goes with this. We have a number of topic pages related to COVID. We also have the Household Pulse Survey. That's a survey we did in conjunction with the Bureau of Census. And it's a new data on COVID-19 that's looking at weekly impacts of households and their decisions related to the pandemic. A third recent research effort is an analysis of the European Commission's Farm to Fork initiative. That initiative is the European Commission's approach to a green deal for agriculture. And we did an analysis that looked at the impact of the European initiative related to world trade, related to food insecurity worldwide, and in terms of its impact on the US as well. So these are three recent activities we've been engaged in. Next slide, please. And our priorities include staffing and training. We're filling many positions right now. We're rapidly absorbing a growing workforce with an eye to the future. As you know, we had a new location, a second duty station set up in Kansas City at 805 Pennsylvania Avenue. And we have filled more than 96 positions in the last fiscal year. Right now, we have another 30 plus we filled, and another 50 positions that our recruitment is in progress. That is, announcements are out, interviews conducted, offers in the works. The other priority I'd like to mention is timely release of research. We focus on being relevant. Part of being relevant is being timely. And we need to do a better job of getting our work out in a timely fashion and as well make it digestible to our clients. Next slide, please. We are also positioned to contribute to the administration's agenda. We're ready to inform the policy agenda on climate change and agriculture, food and nutritional insecurity, open and competitive markets, racial and social equity, and several other items that are on the books here. We have a executive order on America's supply chains, and there's a food supply chain resilience component to that, and ERS is looking to help contribute to that project. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Of course, you have your instructions on how to prepare your questions. Here's my contact information, and please feel free to reach out to us. Follow these links. We have Ask USDA is a good link. We're on Twitter, and of course we have a website that's full of lots of data products. We have 72 different data products, as well as a wide range of reports. And with that, I'll pass it on to our next.
Our next speaker is Herbert. He is an administrator at the National Agricultural Statistics Service, which is part of the USDA.
And I welcome the opportunity to share some information about the National Agricultural Statistics Service, NASS, our mission, and how we operate. Next slide, please. NASS is the data collection arm for USDA, and our mission is to provide timely, accurate, and useful statistics in service to U.S. agriculture. Next. Well, who is NASS? We're an eclectic group, a mixture of statisticians, mathematicians, survey methodologists, analysts, demographers, IT specialists, public affairs specialists. We have a lot of skill sets and a lot of dedicated professionals, many career options at NASS. Next. Let's take a quick look back at our history. We have two favorite presidents, Washington and Lincoln. George Washington was the first agricultural statistician. He surveyed local states to get information on land values, prices, and yields. And of course, Abraham Lincoln, he established the department in 1862, the People's Department, with the intended purpose of information gathering. That ties in nicely with NASS. Our first report was released in July of 1863. Next. Okay, this graphic highlights the NASS field footprint. We have 12 regional offices. You'll notice the stars. And 33 satellite offices to give us coverage over the 50 states. In addition to that, we have 5 data collection centers, the yellow dots. These are basically phone banks that we use to do survey follow-up activities after we mail out questionnaires to respondents. In our field operations, our primary focus is on data collection. We have our print mail facilities located here. We also do data capture, enumerator training, the initial analysis for our survey results are done in the regional field offices, and then that is transferred over to headquarters. NASS is one of the smaller agencies in USDA with about 850 full-time federal employees. About 55% of our staff are located outside of Washington, D.C., and the balance in our headquarters in Washington, D.C. Our federal staff is augmented with about 3,000 contract employees, enumerators, that are provided by the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, NASDA, our longtime partner. We've been in partnership for 49 years with NASDA. About 2,400 of those 3,000 contract employees are what we call field enumerators. They knock on the doors of significant producers to collect information in a non-pandemic time frame. And the balance, the other 600 enumerators work in those 5 data collection centers to make calls to farmers and ranchers. They are currently doing that job, working from home, again, in observance of the pandemic. Next. This visual gives you a schematic view of USDA from the Secretary's office, the staff offices underneath him. And I'll draw your attention to the bottom row with the 8 mission areas listed. And of course, NASS and ERS are included in the research, education, and economics mission area, along with NCFAR and ARS. Next. This graphic highlights the NASS core values on the left. We want to make sure that we're relevant to policymakers, objective in our statistical work. We maintain credibility with our data users, the trust of our data providers, and we have a strong commitment to customer service. The graphic on the right highlights that we are along with ERS, part of the U.S. federal statistical system. Inside the graphic, there are 5 principles that the statistical agency use for decision making. Again, they want to be relevant, have credibility, trust, and a different one here, independence in the statistical activities, and have a need for continual improvement and innovation. So these are the 5 principles of statistical agencies. On the outer circle, we show 11 of the president's 15 cabinet level departments, and inside that circle, you have the 13 principal statistical agencies highlighted at 10 o'clock on your dial with NASS and ERS representing USDA. Okay, next slide. What do? We assemble, we process, and disseminate more than 450 statistical reports on an annual basis. We have information on crops, livestock, economic, environmental, and demographic statistics. Basically, any facet of agriculture, we have them covered in some form or fashion. In addition to that, we conduct the detailed census of agriculture every 5 years. This is the most comprehensive set of information for and about U.S. agriculture, and we have information down to more than 3,000 counties parishes, and boroughs across the United States. In addition to the mainland census, we also collect data for the outlying areas of Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the like. So we collect all of that information. Next slide. Things we don't do. We're not involved in setting policy. We don't regulate any activities, nor do we permit any influence in our statistical products. It's illegal for us to disclose any information that is provided to us by farmers and ranchers. Those data are protected by law, and their data can only be shared in summary fashion at the county level, the district level, state and US level. And we don't favor any group above another. Next slide. I want to introduce you to something that some of you may be familiar with. It's called lockup. What is it? Why do we have it? We have it because in 1905 we had a scandal at USDA. Some information was leaked on cotton. That was the most important commodity at the time. It was leaked from an analyst to a trader. And if you have the information, market moving information before the markets open, you're able to take a position in the markets and obviously do a lot better. Eventually that was uncovered, and we put in a process called lockup. So this is an invitation for you during the once we're over the pandemic to get an invitation to come into lockup. Next slide. So what is lockup? It's a full physical perimeter around the workspace. You're in a bubble, basically disconnected from the world. No access to the internet, no phones, no contact with anyone other than the people inside that workspace working on these reports. Depending on the month, you may show up anywhere from midnight with the security in place when you come in, and you would not be able to leave this space until noon the next day when that report is being released. Next slide. So why do we have a board process, an agricultural statistics board process? Number one, to avoid errors, to make sure that we have a consistent review of the data and information before these reports are released, to evaluate national level indications and data. Our surveys are more precise at the US level. And to, again, to ensure the highest level of security is in place. Next slide. When preparing these statistics, our estimates are based on data. We receive information directly from farmers and ranchers, the producers. That's the best source of information. We also collect information from agribusinesses. We utilize administrative data from agencies within USDA, such as the Farm Service Agency and others. We have objective measure information where we send trained enumerators into fields to collect samples from corn fields, soybean fields, cotton, wheat fields. They collect samples, weigh those samples, send those into our labs for processing. And in addition to that, we also have very powerful satellite data that we use in our agricultural statistics program. Next slide. Our survey and estimation process is controlled from Washington, D.C., the specifications, the content. The field offices are very involved in building a list of farm operators, training our enumerators, collecting data, doing analysis, and then sending recommendations into headquarters to the Agricultural Statistics Board, where these reports are published from Washington, D.C., our Agricultural Statistics Board. Next slide. Some of the commodities that are produced under lockup conditions, the major commodities: corn, soybeans, sorghum, cotton. On the livestock side, cattle and hogs and pigs, grain stocks. So the major commodities are handled with this special security in mind. Next slide. All of the blinds are sealed with a lead clasp. Next slide. We want to make sure that no one is sending signals or anything out of the building. So we have security in place to inspect those before and after lockup. Next slide. You have to have clearance to be admitted into the process. There is screening similar to when you go through the airport to make sure you don't have any transmittal devices, no smartphones, no Apple Watches, nothing that will communicate with the outside world is allowed inside lockup. Next slide. Once in, the Agricultural Statistics Board is convened. It has experts from Washington, D.C., and also from the major producing areas across the country to come in and set these national level estimates that are released within lockup. Next slide. There are clocks all over the space. All parts of this process is timed such that you can get the boards completed, a report completed that's released to the public, and also a briefing that is conducted for the Secretary of Agriculture. Next slide. Next slide. In addition to providing a briefing for the Secretary, we also invite farmers and ranchers, agribusiness groups to come in. Generally, again, in a non-pandemic year, we would entertain between 400 and 500 producers during the year to actually witness the process, to see the security, and be in place when the report is actually released. Next slide. At about 15, 20 minutes before the release, the Secretary of Agriculture or his designate comes over. He'll sign the report before he knows the content. Once the report has been signed, he will receive a briefing of the content so that he's aware of what's happening out there in the production on the ground. One additional thing that is interesting, the Secretary or his designate has a 1-hour moratorium that they're not allowed to speak about the content of the report. If the Secretary says something when he leaves lockup, the markets may react to that. So he cannot speak about the report until an hour has passed to allow the markets to digest the new data. Next slide. I mentioned that the Secretary will get a briefing. He'll actually see the content, generally accompanied by the chief economist. If there are questions that he'd like to ask, what does this mean for prices, et cetera, he's able to digest that information. Next slide, and I just wanted to end with the slide to say that NASS is always recruiting. These are some of the disciplines that we're hiring. Normally, obviously, statistics, animal science, computer science, those are the areas that we generally are recruiting in. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Our final speaker is Barbara Glenn. She is the CEO of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to NCFAR for the invitation to provide some remarks. NASDA is a proud member of NCFAR, so I urge all of you to contact us and we can talk about that. But I'm just really honored and pleased today to be with Dr. Sterfanou and Mr. to talk about the customer perspective. So as you listen to me, I'm representing the entire food and agriculture community as best I can. NASDA members are commissioner secretaries and directors of state departments of agriculture in all states and 4 territories. They are indeed public servants, and they are elected and appointed officials. As public servants, NASDA supports a very strong state and federal partnership. And so via such partnerships with ERS and with NASS, we collectively serve U.S. agriculture and the food sectors, and we serve all Americans. So I would say to you today, we are indeed together at the table. So if I could have the next slide, please. I thought I'd share a couple points about NASDA itself. Our mission is to grow and enhance American agriculture through policy, partnerships, and public engagement. We are, as an organization, indeed the united voice for the state departments of agriculture, and our members serve as co-regulators with the federal government, but also their educators, their ambassadors, and their advocates. We say that NASDA members are closest to the customers of food and agriculture, so the farmers, ranchers, and the consumers, and they serve right on that line between rural and urban America across the entire country. Next slide, please. Every year, our board of directors sets our policy priorities, and I thought I'd take just a minute to share those with you for 2021. Certainly, as the board reviewed these and approved them, we were looking through the lens of COVID-19 and the many, many months of responding to the pandemic. But these are our policy priorities for this year: food safety and food systems, climate resiliency, international trade, workforce development, and infrastructure. And although there's a lot I could unpack under there, I think my primary message to you is that every policy priority and its solution depends on having sound information, sound data, and facts. So let's go to the next slide. Indeed, agriculture is all about those facts, isn't it? We've been hearing that already today. It's all about data. And I would assert to everyone here that NASS and ERS are increasingly more important to food, forestry, agriculture across the board. Of course, agriculture relies on data. We're a data-driven sector, and we need the best available data. It needs to be verifiable, and it needs to be as current as possible. Innovation and discovery for food and ag drive us more in this direction. The trends in data science, in digital solutions, in precision ag and traceability, and then adding on top of all of that, artificial intelligence simply mean that to support the future of ag, we're going to be relying on data for farms of all sizes and for farmers of all types. So indeed, ag requires unbiased, credible, objective statistical information. So let's go to the next slide. Fortunately, our two colleagues here today lead the agencies that provide just that, and through their national, local, and global reporting, many rely on ERS and NASS data. That includes the whole route of the community from farm to table. So farmers and ranchers, other USDA agencies, other cabinet departments in the federal government, the White House. Certainly our state policymakers rely on the ERS and NASS information, but also the federal policymakers and locals as well are very important. Agribusiness, including the farm and industry groups, rely on their information. And as Herbert, I think, mentioned, ag traders as well look for that market moving information in their reports. And in addition to this list, the researchers who are conducting the good analysis from ag economics and all the other sciences need this information. The media needs the information. And most importantly, consumers need it. So in order to maintain that strong position for food and agriculture, that we are an essential sector, and we've learned that even more during the pandemic, we have to tell the story of agriculture, and that's going to rely on data. And in the meantime, these two agencies maintain producers' trust, and they protect the privacy of the information. And before I go on, I thought I'd mention a couple products. Certainly, NASS leads the Census of Agriculture, the last one being reported out in 2017. And this indeed is the only source of uniform, comprehensive, and impartial agricultural data for every county in the nation that gets aggregated up depending on what our needs are. So this is a critical report. One of the facts that is relevant today, we're talking about that we have 3.4 million farmers and workers, and the large majority of them, over 95%, are white farmers, but we have 3.3% are Hispanic and Latino, and then 2.3% are American Indian and Alaskan Native, and finally, Black farmers represent 1.4% of our US farmers. This information comes from the Ag Census and is particularly relevant today with all of our discussions. A headline that came out today, I thought I'd share with you, says producers begin corn planting. And so indeed, 2% of the nation's corn crop's been planted, and that is according to the National Agricultural Statistics Service. So this is the kind of information you get real time. Planting is in line at 2% of the crop with the 5-year average, according to NASS. So that's good to know. Texas has already planted 55% of their corn. So I thought I'd share that with you. Relevant information. With respect to ERS, they have many, many products. I want to mention the charts of note, amber waves, your research reports, and And the administrator mentioned the amazing COVID-19 working papers. All of these are very important, but yesterday the headline said federal aid boosts supermarket spending. And indeed, this was from a USDA ERS report that indicated that low-income Americans spent nearly $8.5 billion a month on food using SNAP and pandemic EBT benefits during the pandemic last year. And that's an 86% increase compared to a comparable 6-month period in 2019. So just amazing information to have. And a lot of what I just said focuses to consumers. So these are some products of the two agencies that I know NASDA members really relish. So let's go to the next slide, please. NASDA has a very robust partnership with NASS, and I wanted to mention that every state Department of Agriculture actually has a memorandum of understanding with NASS. And the first MOU was actually with the state of Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Department of Ag in 1917. So this has been a long time partnership. And through these MOUs, we provide, NASS provides collection, analysis, and publication of primary statistical data for the state. And that results in analyses that include production, price, value, movement, stocks, processing, and other uses of crops, livestock, and agricultural commodities produced in that state. Amazingly, we can also work with NASS to have a reimbursable survey or a special project on a specialized commodity in your state. So an example would be the California Department of Food and Ag. They had a grape acreage survey done in partnership with NASS. So a lot of core information comes from these state-by-state relationships with NASS. And the next slide, please. Herbert mentioned that we have a very strong relationship in terms of a cooperative agreement. And this was established in 1972, and it's NASDA's longest standing agreement. And within that agreement, NASDA does employ the over 2,500 part-time enumerators who conduct the NASS surveys and collect data. So I guess we're in at the ground floor as NASDA. But I think it's amazing to learn the work of the enumerators, particularly with the pandemic. Much of it has always been in person or in the field. But there are those now working virtually, and of course there are those working on the phones. And I think their work has shown the resilience of farmers and ranchers through data collection historically, but also during this pandemic. So not only do we have this partnership with NASS, but it's really a partnership with farmers and ranchers who are willing to respond. They're willing to bring their data forward. And response rate is so important to a data set, as we all know. So this is a great partnership. Let's move to the next slide. We also really appreciate the products and the work with ERS, and Administrator Sterfanou has already mentioned the ARMPS, the Agricultural Resource Management Survey. I thought I would just point to this one because it's done jointly by ERS and NASS. And again, like the Ag Census, this is the primary source of information on the financial condition, production practices, and costs and resource use of the nation's farms and ranches and their households. So it's very, very significant information. It's used to evaluate financial performance of farms and ranches and their businesses and to make policy decisions. This information is not just used by state departments of ag, it's used by other farm organizations, commodity groups, agribusiness, policymakers, and many others. And really, the data from this survey underpins USDA's annual estimates of net farm income. So there are many other products of ERS that the administrator mentioned, and including state fact sheets I wanted to mention, but just an amazing array of resources provided to our NASDA members and to agriculture as a whole. The next slide, please. I wanted to summarize the benefits of these relationships, particularly with our members, but others in agriculture as well. We use the data of these two agencies in many different ways, evaluate and propose policies and programs that help producers, assess projections on commodity supply, demand, and prices, monitor consumer trends and behaviors, make well-informed decisions on how to best serve farms and ranches, and determine how to allocate state resources. Alaska Director David Shade, one of our NASDA members, recently said he used NASS data to justify and maintain a major proportion of his department's budget and his state of Alaska was undergoing some budget challenges. And similarly, New Mexico Secretary Jeff Whitty recently said that the annual New Mexico Agricultural Statistics Report, which comes completely from NASS data, is the most sought after report by his community, including the media who wants to write about it. And they always include a feature coming from the current information. Recently, they've done women ag leaders and processing of produce. So a very popular use of the NASS data. So my last slide is next. I wanted to touch on a few challenges and opportunities as NASDA sees them. First of all, the opportunity of working with the new administration is really amazing, and I'm very pleased to say quite robust. Secretary Vilsack and these two administrators of these two agencies have been very open and transparent in working with all of us in the food and ag sectors. Federal budgets have been tight for the USDA RE&E mission area, but NASDA supports increasing public funding for both ERS and for NASS, and we have continued to do that for many, many years, as well as for the other two agencies in the mission area, ARS and NIFA. We look forward to the continued regrowth of ERS to full strength in terms of staffing, and program execution is key, as the administrator mentioned. State budgets are tight as well, and so we're always looking for legislative vehicles to promote ERS and NASS, and at the same time, that dovetails to promote it for our NASDA members. The number one priority, I think, is that we must have high quality, unbiased, verifiable data for the future. And as I mentioned, there are going to be new technologies and new statistical tools used to summarize telling the story for agriculture. And this is going to require collaboration by ERS and NASS within USDA agencies, but also with the other departments. And I wanted to mention to you that we had the pleasure in front of NASDA members to hear from NASA, yes, the space people, NASA, and the work they're doing with satellite data in collaboration with NASS to bring even more robust information to our sector. Discussions are really active on these areas of climate resiliency, trade, equity, and more. And information and analysis that's provided by ERS and NASS is going to continue to be the foundation. It's going to provide the pathways forward for farmers and ranchers of all sizes and all types. And it's going to provide the sound underpinning for good policy and sound legislation. So for NASDA, and I know for the entire community, I speak for all of us when we say ERS and NASS are more important than ever before. So with that, I'm pleased to just show my contact information. And yes, absolutely, please reach out to me if I can be of any assistance to you. And I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Barb, thanks so much, and thanks to all of our great panelists. I think this was a wonderful discussion about the importance and the value of ERS, NASS, and partners like NASDA. I want to be sure to get, and so I think the first question, and many of you alluded to this, but maybe something that each panelist could touch on, how has the pandemic impacted your ability to collect data? We heard about how critical data was from Barb, but each of you are in the business of helping collect and then analyze data. What challenges did the pandemic present, and did you find any innovations that you think may help you for the future that came out of the pandemic? Maybe start with Spiro, then Herbert, and then Barb, please.
Well, thanks, Lowell. Interesting question. We do not go out into the field. We don't face challenges with knocking on doors and such. Herbert will talk about that, I'm sure. But we've started to pick up some new data products to see what's going on. In fact, one of the data products we acquired now is what are the weekly food sales, food retail sales, and food service sales, so we can track those patterns throughout the year in real time, weekly data, in fact. So we've been trying to pick up these other databases. The household pulse survey is another one as well. So we've been looking to new data products to help us really react to the pandemic. I'll pass it to Herbert.
Hubert?
Thank you. Well, we've had major issues with the pandemic. Obviously, I talked about the large cadre of enumerators that we have collecting information. About 2,400 generally would knock on doors to collect information. So obviously, we've had no face-to-face contact with producers. Our posture was we wanted to make sure, number one priority, protect the health and safety of all of our employees, NASS and NASDA. In addition to that, we had 5 call centers, data collection centers spread across. They're basically our phone banks, and we had about 600 employees, NASDA employees, that worked those phone banks. We had to, again, reassess that, provide laptops and iPads for those individuals to work from home, to continue making the same calls that they were making from those call centers. And the field enumerators, they were also able to make phone calls from home. The other thing that's been interesting, we've seen a large uptick in response on the internet. I know that we have a lot of individuals using the internet a lot more for shopping, and they're a lot more comfortable with that. So we've seen the internet response rates along with mail increase substantially. And basically, we are about at the same levels of response that we were before the pandemic. So we've had to make a lot of changes. We had some surveys that required face-to-face only enumeration, and we've had to reconfigure those to collect the data in a different way.
That's great, thanks. And Barb, from a NASDA perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I think, first of all, we were really impacted by the pandemic, immediately understanding that food and agriculture was a critical infrastructure. And our top priority, as Hubert said, was worker safety in the states. And so not only were we partnered with NASS with respect to the safety of the enumerators, but also within state departments of ag, we immediately were protecting our staff, because it had to be business as usual, plus. And then we were doing all the other good work to feed the hungry. So worker safety and feed the hungry meant we needed to continue to press. And I would say the top core competency that our members engaged in to keep a strong food supply chain was partnerships. Robust partnerships evolved. That may not seem like counting data or collecting data, but indeed it was, because it's about relationships and working across groups that you've never worked with before. And we were very proud of each NASDA member and the work they did in their states to ultimately feed the hungry in many different ways and provide avenues for farmers and ranchers to give their products away or sell their products.
That's great, thank you. So next question comes in for Dr. Sterfanou. What is the best way to go about suggesting specific research topics for ERS?
Well, typically for folks up on the Hill and others, you can request a staff analysis. If you have a need to address a question, you could direct a staff analysis. You can make a staff analysis request to us, and it may be something we could turn around in 2 days or 2 weeks, or if it's more intricate, a couple of months. But we're available here to provide this kind of support to the folks at the government.
That's great, thank you. And then maybe a follow-up question to that: as Congress starts to look at infrastructure and climate proposals, what data do ERS and NASS have or are working on that could help inform the topics of both infrastructure and climate?
I'll speak to climate. For one, we've been doing some work, recently released a report on cover crops. Cover crops can help the climate by supporting the soil health, and in that way help address climate change impacts on agriculture. We have just completed and released a report on a survey of irrigation organizations. These are the folks who kind of manage our water resources. And it's kind of odd thing in agriculture. We see water everywhere, but in the data. And so we're starting to pull that together. So those are a couple of sources that we have available to folks right now.
Great, thank you. Herbert, thoughts on NASS resources that can help support policymakers as they look at climate issues and infrastructure issues?
I would point first to our satellite imagery. We have a number of different products that we have available to the public. More specifically, we've invested in satellite radar technology, again, to measure the impact of hurricanes and some of the water damage that we've seen across the country, water inundation. And I think no matter if it's cloudy or whatever, you're able to see through that to be able to gather information about the impact, how wide the disaster is, how many acres are affected, et cetera. So we've got some geospatial products to help with that.
Great, thanks. And Barb, I'll throw it over to you as well. I know NASDA, your state departments are working a lot on these issues as well. Thoughts on climate and infrastructure?
Yeah, absolutely. These are two of our top tier policy priorities. I think it's safe to say that both of them are in the sight line on Capitol Hill for legislative solutions. And from NASDA's perspective, the information that ERS and NASS can provide, it is in that bucket now more than ever, more important to undergird those legislative proposals. And so I would say, particularly along the lines of something we know we support, are voluntary incentive-based climate smart practices for farmers and ranchers on the climate side. We need bipartisan solutions. And so the data, the facts, the unbiased information that is provided by ERS and NASS just is essential. I don't know how else to say it. So really, I'm glad the two agencies are there for that purpose.
Yeah, thanks. And I realize I forgot to introduce myself, and I'll give you a little context for the hat that I'm wearing today. I'm Washington representative for the Agricultural and Applied Economics Association, and I know that our bank of economics and social scientists across the country are so very much reliant on the great work of ERS and NASS and the data. And so I'll just echo that we greatly appreciate the commitment and work of all of the panelists and organizations that are represented here. One last plug for questions that folks may have to put into the chat box. I know we're a couple of minutes over time, but we want to make sure that we have that two-way dialogue, and so would welcome any last questions that folks may have. And I'll pause there for just a second to see if any other questions come forward. And while I do, we're coming up on a Farm Bill year soon. And I might just say, similar to the climate and infrastructure question, maybe for Spiro and Herbert, thoughts on how your agencies can be a resource for policymakers as they look towards the next Farm Bill?
I'll start off. Barb used the key word, incentive-driven changes. So we look at the economics of the situation, which involves behavior, and what kind of policies, what kind of incentives are out there that are being proposed, and what are the potential responses by producers and other stakeholders. Just to emphasize again, we do the economic science to inform policy, and we're here ready and able to do that. A key one that's going to come up is resilience of our supply chains, and so we're positioning ourselves to really add value to that agenda in particular. But we can add value to all the aspects. They all interrelate, whether it's equity issues and climate related to food access, related to competitive markets, food insecurity. We're available here. We have the expertise.
Great.
And I'll say that NASS works hand in glove with ERS. We provide the baseline information and data needed for their economic assumptions. And obviously, I mentioned the suite of products that we have, more than 450 reports annually, and the census data. If there are other data needs that are not part of the portfolio, we would need to hear about those and try to find a way to get a funding stream to take care of that. But we're here to provide the baseline information.
Great. I've got two more questions. Does NASDA or USDA regularly collect notifiable and non-notifiable livestock poultry disease prevalence data? If so, are those available?
I don't have a quick answer for that, but I appreciate the question. Happy to double check on that. I'll pass that over to Herbert and Spiro.
Same here. That's not something that we would have, but it could be somewhere in the department.
Right.
That may be more likely APHIS.
Yeah.
And then I think our final question for Dr. Sterfanou, on staffing levels. We know that you've gone through some transitions. When they're all filled, will ERS have more staff, fewer staff, or similar levels than before the relocation?
Well, before the relocation, we were around 330 staff. We may be up to about 270 or so by the end of this fiscal year, and we'll be continuing to hire. Whether we go above our level just depends on being able to demonstrate a need that we need more staff. The challenges for 2025 and beyond are different than the ones that were there in 2005. So, that's what we're looking for. We're looking to the future of what can ERS provide for the future needs of the department.
Great. Well, on behalf of the National Coalition for Food and Agricultural Research, thank you to all of our panelists, administrators Sterfanou, Hamer, and Dr. Glenn from NASDA. We greatly appreciate your participation. And thanks to everyone who's dialed in for this briefing. We had great turnout, great questions, and hopefully this is really helpful for all participants to better understand the critical roles of ERS and NASS. One last plug for National Coalition for Food and Ag Research as well. Let us know if we can be a resource to any of you as you go through your policy deliberations. With that, I wish you all a good day.